Have you ever wondered how the smallest act of courage could not only save a life, but also heal two broken hearts? The marble floors of the Moreau estate gleamed under the afternoon sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything in this mansion spoke of wealth and precision, from the imported Italian furniture to the carefully curated art collection lining the walls. But despite all its grandeur, the house carried an emptiness that no amount of luxury could fill. It was a beautiful cage, silent, except for the soft footsteps of staff moving like shadows through endless corridors, careful never to disturb the fragile peace. Roberto Moreau stood in his home office, a glass of whiskey untouched on his mahogany desk. At 42, he was a man who had built an empire from nothing. His investment firm controlled billions, his name opened doors across 3 continents, and his face regularly appeared in business magazines as one of Brazil's most successful entrepreneurs. Yet none of that mattered when he looked at the photograph on his desk. His son, Junior, a beautiful child with dark curls and eyes that seemed to hold questions no one could answer. Junior had been born deaf. 3 years had passed since that devastating diagnosis. 3 years of Roberto traveling to specialists in New York, London, Tokyo, spending fortunes on treatments that promised hope but delivered nothing. His late wife, Mariana, had died giving birth to their son, leaving Roberto to navigate fatherhood alone while drowning in guilt and grief. He'd thrown himself into work, building wealth as if money could somehow fix what medicine could not. But every night when he came home to this silent mansion, he was reminded that some things couldn't be bought. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Moreau, the new nanny has arrived for the interview." Roberto sighed, setting down his glass. This would be the 5th nanny in 6 months. The others had all left, claiming the job was too difficult, the child too challenging, though he suspected they simply couldn't handle the weight of working in a house where grief hung in the air like expensive perfume. He straightened his tie and walked downstairs to the sitting room, preparing himself for another disappointing meeting. What he didn't expect was Jessica Santos. She stood in the middle of his ornate sitting room, looking completely out of place, like a wildflower in a garden of sculpted roses. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing a modest dress that had clearly been ironed with care. Her resume was thin. No formal training, no references from wealthy families, but something in the way she stood, with her shoulders back and her chin up, despite obvious nervousness, made him pause. "Miss Santos," he said coolly, not bothering to shake her hand as he sat in the leather armchair across from her. "Your credentials are limited. Why should I trust you with my son?" Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her small purse, but her voice was steady. "Because I understand what it means to feel helpless, Mr. Moreau. My younger sister was deaf, Carolina. She lost her hearing when she was 5 from a fever. My family couldn't afford proper treatment, and I watched her struggle every day until..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "Until she passed away 3 years ago." Roberto's expression remained impassive, but something shifted in his chest. "I'm sorry for your loss. However, sympathy isn't qualification." "I'm not asking you to hire me out of sympathy," Jessica said, her brown eyes meeting his directly for the first time. "I'm asking you to give me a chance because I know what it's like to love someone who lives in silence. I know how to communicate without words. I know patience, and I know that every child deserves to be seen and understood, not just managed." There was a long pause. Roberto studied her. This young woman who had lost someone she loved, and somehow still had the courage to walk into a grieving household and offer her heart again. Against his better judgment, he found himself saying, 2 weeks, trial period. If you can't handle it, you leave without complaint. The pay is 15,000 reais per month, and you'll live in the staff quarters. Do we have an agreement?" Jessica's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entirely. "Yes, Mr. Moreau. Thank you. I promise I won't let you down." "We'll see," he said dismissively, already turning toward the door. "Mrs. Silva, the head housekeeper, will show you to your room and introduce you to Junior. I expect you to follow house rules strictly. I don't tolerate unprofessionalism." As he walked away, he didn't see the way Jessica's smile faded into something more determined, more resolute. She whispered to herself, "I won't fail another child. Not this time." The staff quarters were modest but comfortable, a sharp contrast to the opulence of the main house. Mrs. Silva, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, led Jessica through the narrow hallways with brisk efficiency. "Mr. Moreau is a good employer, but he's very particular," Mrs. Silva warned as they walked. "He's been through a lot since his wife died. The boy. Well, the boy is the center of his world, but also his greatest pain. Don't get too close, don't ask personal questions, and whatever you do, never make promises you can't keep." The last nanny promised she could help the child, and when she failed, it broke Mr. Moreau's heart all over again. Jessica nodded, absorbing every word. They stopped at a door at the end of the hallway. Mrs. Silva knocked softly before opening it. Junior's nursery was beautiful. Soft blue walls decorated with hand-painted clouds, shelves filled with expensive toys that looked barely touched, a crib that could have belonged to royalty. But none of that caught Jessica's attention. What captured her completely was the small boy sitting on the carpet, surrounded by wooden blocks, building a tower with intense concentration. He didn't look up when they entered. His world was one of visual focus, his dark curls falling over his forehead as he carefully placed each block, his small hands working with remarkable precision for a 3-year-old. He was wearing tiny designer clothes, a polo shirt and perfectly pressed shorts, but somehow he still looked lonely, like a little prince trapped in a castle made of silence. Jessica's heart broke and mended simultaneously. She knelt down slowly, making sure to enter his field of vision so she wouldn't startle him. When Junior finally noticed her, he stopped building and stared with curious dark eyes that reminded her painfully of Carolina. "Hello," she signed slowly, her hands forming the simple greeting. Junior's eyes widened slightly with surprise. Most adults didn't try to communicate with him beyond basic gestures. "My name is Jessica. What's your name?" Junior hesitated, then pointed to himself and held up 3 fingers, his way of saying he was 3 years old. It wasn't an answer to her question, but it was communication, and Jessica smiled warmly. 3 years old, she signed back. "You're a big boy. Can you show me what you're building?" Something shifted in Junior's expression, a cautious interest. He turned back to his blocks and continued building, but now he glanced at Jessica occasionally, checking if she was still watching, still interested. She was. Mrs. Silva cleared her throat. "Dinner is at 6. Junior eats separately from Mr. Moreau. It's easier that way. You'll be responsible for his meals, bedtime routine, and activities during the day. Mr. Moreau usually comes home around 8, and he'll check on the boy before bed. Any questions?" "Yes," Jessica said softly, still watching Junior. "Does anyone play with him? Really play, I mean, not just supervise." Mrs. Silva's expression softened just slightly. "No one's had much success with that. He's very internal, keeps to himself. May I try?" The older woman shrugged. "It's your job to try, dear. Just don't expect miracles." After Mrs. Silva left, Jessica spent the rest of the afternoon in that nursery, not pushing, not demanding, just being present. She built her own tower next to Junior's, occasionally knocking it down and making exaggerated, surprised faces that made the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. She drew pictures on paper and showed them to him. She moved slowly, predictably, never overwhelming him. By the time dinner arrived, Junior had done something he hadn't done with any previous caretaker. He'd reached out and touched Jessica's hand, just briefly, to show her a block he particularly liked. It was a small gesture, barely anything, but to Jessica it felt like a victory. That evening, Roberto returned home exhausted from another endless day of meetings and negotiations. He loosened his tie as he climbed the stairs, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on his shoulders. He'd made 3 million rees that day, closing a deal with European investors, but all he could think about was his silent son. He paused outside Junior's nursery, the door slightly ajar, and heard something that made him freeze. Humming, soft, gentle, a lullaby. He pushed the door open quietly and saw Jessica sitting beside Junior's crib, gently patting the boy's back as he slept, humming a simple melody. She hadn't noticed Roberto yet, completely absorbed in her task. "He can't hear you," Roberto said, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. Jessica startled slightly, but didn't stop her gentle rhythm. "I know," she said quietly, "but I can hear me, and somehow I think it helps. The vibration, maybe, or just the feeling that someone cares enough to sing, even if he can't hear it." Roberto stepped further into the room, studying his son's peaceful face. "How was he today?" "Curious, cautious, smart." Jessica smiled softly. "He built a tower 15 blocks high, very impressive for his age." "He's always been focused," Roberto said, a note of pride creeping into his voice despite himself. He moved closer, looking down at his sleeping son, and for a moment, the harsh businessman facade cracked, revealing the wounded father underneath. "Sometimes I wonder if he knows how much I love him. If he understands that every day I wake up wishing I could give him the one thing all my money can't buy." Jessica looked up at him, and their eyes met in the dim nursery light. She saw past the expensive suit and cold demeanor to the man drowning in guilt and grief. "Children know love, Mr. Moreau. It doesn't need words or sounds. It's in the touch, the presence, the way you look at them. He knows." Roberto's jaw tightened. "You can't possibly know that." "No," Jessica agreed softly. "But I choose to believe it. Hope is all we have sometimes." He stared at her for a long moment, this young woman who spoke of hope in a house that had forgotten what it felt like. Then, without another word, he turned and left, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. Jessica let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She looked down at Junior's peaceful face and whispered, "Your daddy loves you so much, little one, more than you know. And somehow, we're going to help him find his way back to you." The days turned into weeks, and slowly, imperceptibly, something began to change in the Moreau household. Jessica settled into her role with a quiet competence that even Mrs. Silva had to respect. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, never overstepped her boundaries, but she also never gave up on Junior. Every morning, she would greet him with the same warmth, using simple signs and exaggerated expressions that made communication possible. She learned his rhythms, his preferences, the way his face would scrunch up when he was frustrated, or how his eyes would light up when he discovered something new. She introduced him to textures, soft blankets, smooth stones from the garden, rough tree bark, giving him ways to experience the world beyond just sight. Roberto watched from a distance, skeptical but intrigued. He'd seen other caregivers try and fail, but Jessica was different. She didn't treat Junior like a problem to be solved or a patient to be managed. She treated him like a person, a little boy with thoughts and feelings, and a right to be understood. One evening, about 3 weeks into Jessica's employment, Roberto came home to find something extraordinary. He heard laughter, not Jessica's, but actual childish giggling, coming from the garden. He walked to the window and saw Jessica and Junior playing a game. She would hide behind a tree, then pop out with a funny face, and Junior would clasp his hands over his mouth, his small body shaking with silent laughter. It was the first time Roberto had seen his son truly happy in months, maybe ever. Something twisted in his chest. gratitude mixed with an emotion he didn't want to name, couldn't afford to name. He found himself seeking reasons to come home earlier. To check on Junior, he told himself, to ensure Jessica was doing her job properly. But truthfully, he began to look forward to those moments when he'd find them together. Jessica reading to Junior from a picture book with animated gestures, or Junior showing her a bug he'd found in the garden while she pretended to be scared, or the two of them sitting by the window watching the rain, Jessica's hand gently on Junior's back. Mrs. Silva noticed the change too. "That girl has a gift," she mentioned one afternoon as she served Roberto his coffee. "The boy's eating better, sleeping better. He even tried to show me a drawing he made today. First time he's tried to communicate with any of us." Roberto grunted, non-committally, but inwardly he agreed. Something about Jessica's presence had brought light into the dark corners of his house, and it wasn't just Junior who was changing. Roberto found himself thinking about Jessica at odd moments, during meetings, while reviewing contracts, on his commute home. He'd recall something she'd said, some small insight about Junior that revealed how closely she paid attention. He noticed details he'd never cared about before, how she always wore the same 3 dresses, carefully rotated and impeccably maintained, how she never took her full day off, preferring to stay close to Junior, how she always said good morning to him with a genuine smile, even when he barely acknowledged her. He tried to maintain his distance, his professional coldness, but it was becoming harder. Jessica had a way of making him feel things he'd buried since Mariana's death: hope, warmth, the possibility of joy beyond grief. It was dangerous, and he knew it. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 weeks into Jessica's employment, Roberto decided to take a rare day off. He found Jessica in the garden with Junior, teaching him about flowers. She'd set up a little exploration station with magnifying glasses and was showing him how to look at petals up close. "Mr. Moreau," she said, surprised to see him. "I wasn't expecting you home. Is everything all right?" "I live here," he said dryly, though there was less bite in his tone than usual. "I'm allowed to be in my own garden." "Of course," Jessica said quickly, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I just meant, Junior and I were studying flowers. Would you like to join us?" It was such a simple invitation, yet it felt monumental. Roberto looked at his son, who was staring up at him with cautious eyes, and found himself nodding before his brain could overrule his heart. "I suppose I have a few minutes." Jessica's smile could have lit up the entire garden. "Junior, look who's here. Your daddy wants to see our flowers too." She made space for Roberto on the grass, seemingly unconcerned about his expensive slacks. Junior watched his father with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty, as Roberto awkwardly lowered himself to sit on the grass, something he hadn't done in years. Jessica handed him a magnifying glass. "We've been looking at how each flower is different. See this rose? If you look really close, you can see tiny drops of water in the petals, and this daisy has such a perfect pattern in the center, like a little galaxy." Roberto looked through the magnifying glass, seeing the flowers as he'd never bothered to before. But more than the flowers, he found himself watching Jessica's animated face as she explained things to Junior, her hands moving expressively, her whole being radiating joy in these simple moments. "You really love this, don't you?" he said quietly. "Not just the job. This, being with him." Jessica's expression softened. "Junior's special, Mr. Moreau. He sees the world differently, experiences it through such focused attention. Being with him teaches me to notice things I'd normally miss. He's like a little philosopher, always observing, always thinking." Roberto looked at his son, who was now carefully touching a rose petal, his small face serious with concentration. "I used to worry that his silence meant he was lonely, trapped in his own world." "Maybe he is lonely sometimes," Jessica said gently. "But he's not trapped. His world is just different from ours." And there's beauty in that difference, if we're willing to see it. Junior suddenly tugged on Jessica's sleeve and pointed excitedly at a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. Jessica's face lit up, and she began signing rapidly, explaining what they were seeing. Roberto watched them, feeling something crack in the walls he'd built around his heart. "Thank you," he said suddenly, the words coming out rough. "For caring about him. For seeing him." Jessica turned to look at him, her brown eyes warm and understanding. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Moreau. This isn't just a job for me, Junior. He reminds me of my sister. Of what could have been if someone had just paid attention, if someone had just cared enough to truly see her." Her voice wavered slightly. "I couldn't save Carolina, but maybe in some small way, I can honor her memory by being here for Junior." Roberto felt his throat tighten. This woman, this young, underpaid nanny, carried so much love and loss in her heart, yet she woke up every day and chose to care, to try, to hope. It humbled him in a way his years of business success never had. "Your sister would be proud of you," he said quietly. Jessica's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I hope so." They sat there in the garden together, three souls finding unexpected peace in each other's company, until Junior yawned and rubbed his eyes, his signal that nap time was approaching. As Jessica stood to take him inside, Roberto found himself wanting to say something more, to prolong this strange, peaceful moment, but he couldn't find the words. That night, lying in his enormous bed in his empty bedroom, Roberto stared at the ceiling and acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. He was developing feelings for his son's nanny. It was inappropriate, complicated, potentially catastrophic. She was his employee, young enough to be starting her career while he was well established in his. There was a massive power imbalance, not to mention the difference in their social standings. Yet none of that changed the fact that when Jessica smiled, his cold house felt warmer. When she spoke about Junior, his heart felt fuller. When she looked at him with those understanding eyes, he felt seen in a way he hadn't since Mariana died. He knew he should fire her, send her away before things became more complicated. But the thought of Junior's face, the light that had returned to his son's eyes, stopped him. He couldn't do that to Junior. He couldn't do that to himself. So he made a decision. He would maintain distance, keep things strictly professional, and bury whatever feelings were trying to surface. It was the only rational choice. But rationality, Roberto would soon discover, had little power over the heart. The uneasy equilibrium Roberto had tried to maintain began to crumble in small, seemingly insignificant ways. He found himself lingering in doorways, watching Jessica with Junior, making excuses to be home during the day, claiming he needed to work from his home office, asking Mrs. Silva casual questions about how Jessica was settling in, what she did on her days off, whether she was happy. Mrs. Silva, no fool despite her stern demeanor, noticed everything. One morning, as she served Roberto his breakfast, she said carefully, "Miss Santos is a good girl, decent, hard-working, devoted to the boy." "I'm aware," Roberto said curtly, not looking up from his newspaper. "She's also been through a lot of loss for someone so young. Lost her sister. Her father died years ago, and her mother passed just before she came here. That's why she needed the job so urgently, to pay off the medical debts." Roberto finally looked up, guilt twisting in his gut. He'd never asked Jessica about her circumstances, never bothered to learn why she'd seemed so desperate during the interview. "I didn't know about her mother." "You didn't ask," Mrs. Silva said without judgment, just fact. "But I thought you should know. That girl lives in the staff quarters, sends most of her salary back to her younger brother so he can finish school, and spends all her time caring for your son like he's her own. She's special, that one. Don't forget it." The implied warning was clear. Don't hurt her. Roberto set down his newspaper, his appetite gone. He was paying Jessica 15,000 Ries a month, generous by most standards. But now he learned she was living on next to nothing, sacrificing everything for a brother he didn't even know existed. The contrast between their worlds had never felt starker. That afternoon, he did something he hadn't done in the 6 weeks since Jessica arrived. He knocked on her door during her free time. She opened it looking surprised, dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual ponytail. Roberto realized he'd never seen her like this, relaxed and off-duty, and the sight hit him harder than he expected. "Mr. Moreau? Is everything all right? Is Junior okay?" "Junior's fine. He's napping." Roberto cleared his throat, suddenly feeling absurdly nervous. "I wanted to discuss your compensation. 15,000 Ries isn't adequate for the level of care you're providing. I'm increasing your salary to 30,000, effective immediately." Jessica's eyes widened. "Mr. Moreau, that's too much. I can't—" "Yes, you can and you will. Consider it payment for what you've done for my son. He's changed remarkably since you arrived. That's worth far more than 30,000 Ries. "But I'm doing this because I want to, not for money," Jessica protested, her pride evident. "I know," Roberto said softly, and that knowledge made his chest ache. "Which is exactly why you deserve to be compensated fairly. Mrs. Silva told me about your brother, about the debts. Let me help, Jessica. Please." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and they both felt the shift it created. Something more personal, more intimate than the formal distance they'd maintained. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means. My brother, Felipe, he's only 16. Our parents. They wanted him to finish school, go to university. I've been so worried I couldn't give him that chance." "Now you can," Roberto said. He hesitated, then added, "If you ever need anything else, for yourself, for Felipe, you just have to ask." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Jessica asked, searching his face. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because you make me feel alive again. Because when I watch you with my son, I see everything I want, but can't have." "Because you deserve kindness," Roberto said instead, keeping his voice neutral. "And because good people should be treated well." He left before she could respond, before he could say something he'd regret. But from that moment, something shifted between them. Jessica began to smile at him differently, with less caution and more openness. She started telling him small stories about Junior's day, sharing observations and little jokes. And Roberto, despite his best intentions, found himself responding, engaging, letting his carefully maintained walls crack just a little more. They developed a routine. Roberto would come home around 6, and instead of going straight to his office, he'd stop by Junior's playroom. Jessica would update him on their day, and he'd watch them together, sometimes joining in their activities, sometimes just observing. Those moments became the highlight of his day, the part he looked forward to during endless board meetings and negotiations. One evening, about 2 months into Jessica's employment, Junior did something extraordinary. As Roberto walked into the playroom, the little boy looked up, smiled, and ran to him, wrapping his small arms around Roberto's legs in an enthusiastic hug. Roberto stood frozen, overwhelmed. Junior had never initiated physical affection before. He'd accepted hugs, but never sought them out, never ran to greet anyone. Slowly, carefully, Roberto knelt down and embraced his son, his eyes burning with emotion. Over Junior's head, he met Jessica's gaze. She was watching them with tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth, radiating joy at this breakthrough. "He's been excited all day, knowing you'd come home soon," she said when Roberto finally pulled back. "I think he understands now. Home means Daddy. safety, love. Roberto couldn't speak. He just nodded, still holding Junior close, feeling pieces of his broken heart finally starting to heal. That night, after Junior was asleep, Roberto found Jessica sitting in the garden, looking up at the stars. He brought 2 glasses of wine without asking if she wanted company, a presumption he wouldn't have made weeks ago. "May I?" he asked, holding up the second glass. Jessica smiled, accepting it. "Of course." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night air warm around them, the distant sounds of the city a soft murmur beyond the estate walls. "What Junior did today," Roberto began, "running to me like that. I've dreamed of that moment for 3 years. I'd started to think it would never happen. Children need to feel safe before they can show love freely," Jessica said. "Junior's always loved you. He just needed to learn that it was okay to show it, that vulnerability wouldn't hurt him." Roberto looked at her, this wise young woman who understood his son better than he understood himself. "How did you become so insightful about all this?" Jessica was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. "When Carolina got sick, I was only 13. I didn't know how to help her. Didn't understand what she needed. I watched her become more withdrawn, more isolated, and I felt so helpless. After she died, I spent years reading everything I could about deaf children, about communication, about trauma and healing. I guess I was trying to understand what I couldn't save." "That's a heavy burden for a child to carry," Roberto said gently. "We all carry something," Jessica replied, meeting his eyes. "You carry guilt about Mariana, about not being able to fix Junior's deafness. But Mr. Moreau, you can't fix everything. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be accepted and loved as they are." Her words hit him like a physical blow. She'd seen through him completely, understood the guilt he'd never spoken aloud. The guilt that he'd somehow failed Mariana by being unable to save her. Failed Junior by being unable to cure him. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've spent 3 years trying to fix things instead of just being present." "But you're learning," Jessica said with a soft smile. "Today, when Junior ran to you, you didn't pull out your phone or check the time or think about work. You just held him. That's what he needs. That's what we all need. Someone who's truly there." Roberto set down his wine glass, his heart pounding. The moonlight caught Jessica's face, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek, the warmth in her eyes, and he felt the walls around his heart crumbling entirely. "Jessica, He stopped himself, the words dying on his lips. He couldn't do this. It wasn't fair to her, wasn't appropriate given their relationship. "Thank you. For everything you've done. For Junior, for me. For helping us find our way back to each other." Jessica looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, mixed with caution. "You don't need to thank me. Being here, helping Junior, being part of this family, it's healing me too. More than you know." They sat there in the garden until late into the night, talking about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. For the first time in years, Roberto felt truly seen, truly understood, and it terrified him as much as it exhilarated him. As they finally went inside, Jessica paused at her door. "Good night, Mr. Moreau." "Roberto?" he said suddenly. "When we're alone, you can call me Roberto." Jessica's smile was like sunrise. "Good night, Roberto." He walked to his room knowing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He was falling for Jessica Santos, and there was no way to stop it. The days that followed were a delicate dance of growing intimacy disguised as professional concern. Roberto and Jessica began having dinner together after Junior went to bed, initially justified as discussing the child's progress, but increasingly becoming the part of the day they both anticipated most. They talked about everything. Roberto's childhood growing up poor in the favelas, how he'd clawed his way to success through ruthless determination. Jessica's memories of Carolina, of their mother's fierce love despite their poverty. They discussed philosophy, argued about politics, shared their favorite books and music. They discovered they both loved old American jazz, that they'd both read Gabriel Garcia Marquez and been transformed by it, that they both believed in something bigger than themselves even if they couldn't quite name it. Mrs. Silva watched their growing closeness with a mixture of approval and concern. She'd known Roberto since he was a young man making his first millions, and she'd never seen him like this. Lighter, younger somehow, laughing at Jessica's jokes and seeking out her company. One evening, she pulled Jessica aside. "Be careful, child." "What do you mean?" Jessica asked, though she knew exactly what the older woman meant. "Mr. Moreau is a good man, but he's complicated. He's powerful, used to getting what he wants. And you." Mrs. Silva's expression softened. "You have a tender heart. I don't want to see it broken." "Nothing's happening," Jessica insisted, but the blush on her cheeks betrayed her. "Maybe not yet," Mrs. Silva said, "but it will. I see the way you look at each other when you think no one's watching. Just remember, you're from different worlds. That doesn't mean you can't find happiness together, but it means the path won't be easy." Jessica lay awake that night, Mrs. Silva's words echoing in her mind. She knew she was falling for Roberto, had been falling for weeks now. The way he'd softened toward Junior, how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, his unexpected moments of vulnerability when he talked about his late wife or his fears as a father. She loved his strength and his weakness, his pride and his humility. But Mrs. Silva was right. They were from different worlds. He was Roberto Moreau, a man whose name commanded respect across the country, who wore suits that cost more than her yearly salary before the raise. She was Jessica Santos from a favela, daughter of a seamstress and a construction worker, who'd never finished college because she couldn't afford it. What could a man like him truly want with a woman like her? She was still wrestling with these thoughts when Junior fell ill. It started subtly. Junior seemed fussier than usual, less interested in their activities. He kept touching his ear, his small face scrunching up in discomfort. Jessica noticed immediately, her caretaker instincts heightened by years of watching over Carolina. "Does it hurt, sweetheart?" she signed, but Junior just whimpered and turned away. By evening, he was running a slight fever. Jessica gave him children's medicine and monitored him closely, but something felt off. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple ear infection. When Roberto came home, Jessica met him at the door, worry etched on her face. "Junior's not well. He has a fever and keeps touching his ear. I gave him medicine, but I think we should have a doctor check him." Roberto's expression immediately shifted to concern. "I'll call Dr. Mendez right away." Dr. Mendez, the family physician, arrived within the hour. One of the perks of having money was instant access to medical care. He examined Junior, who fussed and cried throughout, clearly in distress. "It appears to be an ear infection," Dr. Mendez concluded. "Common in children, especially those with Junior's hearing impairment. I'll prescribe antibiotics. He should feel better in a few days." But Jessica wasn't convinced. As the doctor prepared to leave, she spoke up hesitantly. "Dr. Mendez, could there be something else? He seems more distressed than a typical infection would cause." The doctor's expression became condescending. "Miss Santos, I've been practicing medicine for 20 years. I assure you, I know an ear infection when I see one." "I'm not doubting your expertise," Jessica said carefully, aware of Roberto watching their exchange. "It's just that I've been with Junior every day for months now, and this seems different, more severe. Doctor..." Mendez packed his bag with barely concealed irritation. "Mr. Moreau, I recommend you listen to medical professionals rather than domestic help. The antibiotics will resolve the issue." Roberto hesitated, torn between the doctor's authority and Jessica's instincts. Thank you, doctor. We'll follow your prescription. After Dr. Mendez left, Jessica tried to hide her hurt at being dismissed so casually, but Roberto saw it. Jessica, it's fine, she said quietly. I'm not a doctor. Maybe I'm wrong. But you know Junior, Roberto said. You pay attention in ways others don't. If you think something's wrong, I trust you. Those words, I trust you, meant everything, but they didn't change the fact that they were following the doctor's orders, which Jessica felt, deep in her bones, were wrong. That night, Junior's condition worsened. His fever spiked, and he became increasingly agitated, crying in a way that broke Jessica's heart. She stayed with him all night, sponging his forehead with cool cloths, holding him when he'd allow it, her worry growing with each passing hour. Around 3 a.m, Roberto found her still in Junior's room, dark circles under her eyes, her face etched with exhaustion and concern. You should rest, he said gently. I'll stay with him. I can't, Jessica whispered. Something's wrong, Roberto. This isn't just an infection. I can feel it. Roberto knelt beside her, placing his hand over hers. What do you want to do? I want to look, she said, meeting his eyes. Really look. In his ear. Not with the basic examination the doctor did, but thoroughly. I know it sounds crazy, but when my sister... Her voice broke. When Carolina was sick, the doctors missed things because they didn't look carefully enough. They assumed. And by the time they found what was really wrong, it was too late. What do you think you'll find? Roberto asked, not dismissing her, genuinely wanting to understand. I don't know, but Junior keeps touching the same ear, the left one. And there's this smell, very faint, but it's there. Like something's decaying. That's not normal for a simple infection. Roberto was quiet for a long moment, studying her face, seeing the conviction and fear mingled there. Then he made a decision that would change everything. Do it, he said. Look, if you find nothing, then we follow the antibiotics. But if there's something else, something we're missing... He paused, his voice becoming rough with emotion. I won't make the mistake of ignoring the one person who truly sees my son. Jessica felt tears spring to her eyes. Thank you for trusting me. She moved carefully, waiting until Junior had fallen into an exhausted sleep from crying. She had Roberto bring her a small flashlight and the delicate tweezers she used for sewing. Her hands trembled as she gently tilted Junior's head, shining the light into his tiny ear canal. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the expected redness of inflammation. But then, as her eyes adjusted and she angled the light differently, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Deep in the ear canal, barely visible, was something dark. Not inflamed tissue, not normal anatomy, but something foreign, something that appeared to be moving. Roberto, she breathed, not daring to look away. Come here. Tell me what you see. He leaned over her shoulder, looking where she indicated. His sharp intake of breath told her he saw it too. What is that? He asked, his voice tight. I don't know, but it shouldn't be there. Jessica's training in caring for Carolina kicked in. I need to get it out. If I'm gentle, if I'm careful. What if you hurt him? Roberto asked, fear evident in his voice. What if we leave it there? Jessica countered. Roberto, if this thing is causing his distress, if it's been there for who knows how long. She turned to look at him, her eyes fierce with determination. I have to try. Roberto looked at his sleeping son, then back at Jessica. He saw in her eyes the same quality that had made her family to Junior, an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, regardless of personal cost. Do it, he said. I'll hold him steady if he wakes. Just be careful. Jessica nodded, sending up a silent prayer. Her hands were steadier now, purpose overriding fear. She took the delicate tweezers and, moving with painstaking slowness, reached into Junior's ear canal. The moment felt eternal. Roberto held his breath, one hand on his son's shoulder, ready to hold him still if needed. Jessica's entire focus narrowed to that tiny dark thing in Junior's ear. The tweezers made contact with something soft, almost spongy. She gripped it as gently as possible and began to pull. At first nothing happened. Then, slowly, whatever it was began to slide out. Junior stirred but didn't wake, his body exhausted from hours of crying. Jessica continued pulling, her breath caught in her throat, until finally, with a wet sound that turned her stomach, the thing came free. It lay in the palm of her hand, small and dark and definitely organic. In the light, they could see it more clearly. Some kind of parasite or insect, its body swollen from feeding. It twitched weakly before going still. "Dear God," Roberto whispered, horror and rage mingling in his voice. That was inside my son's ear? Jessica felt sick. All this time. It could have been there for months, years even. Feeding on... She couldn't finish the sentence. Junior suddenly gasped, a small sharp sound. His eyes flew open, and for a moment, he looked confused, disoriented. Then something extraordinary happened. His face transformed with wonder. He sat up, looking around the room with an expression they'd never seen before. Astonishment, fear, excitement all at once. His hands flew to his ears and he made a small sound. Not quite a word, but intentional, vocal. "Junior?" Roberto said softly. And Junior turned his head toward his father's voice. Jessica's heart stopped. "Roberto," she breathed. "Say something else." "Junior, can you hear me?" Roberto's voice cracked with emotion. Junior's eyes went wide. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then, in a small, hoarse voice that had never been used before, he said one word. "Daddy." The sound was rough, uncertain, but unmistakably real. Unmistakably his son's voice. Roberto's legs gave out. He sank to the floor, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. Jessica was crying too, her hands shaking as she held the evidence of what had been stolen from this child. Maybe since birth, maybe longer. Junior looked between them, overwhelmed by this new world of sound. Every breath, every tear, every ambient noise of the house was new to him. He started to cry, not from pain, but from sheer sensory overload. "It's okay, baby," Jessica soothed, gathering him into her arms. "You're okay. You're safe. These are just sounds. They won't hurt you." "Daddy," Junior said again, reaching for Roberto with desperate hands. Roberto pulled both of them into his embrace, his son, and the woman who had given them this miracle. He held them as if he'd never let go, as if by sheer force of will he could protect them from ever knowing pain again. "How?" he finally managed to ask. "How did every doctor miss this?" Jessica's expression hardened, tears still streaming down her face. "Because they weren't looking, Roberto. They saw the diagnosis, deaf child, wealthy family, ongoing treatment revenue, and stopped questioning. They stopped caring." The implications were staggering. If Junior had been hearing impaired because of this parasite, how many other children were suffering the same fate? How many families had been told their children would never hear when the solution had been there all along, hidden in plain sight? Roberto's grief transformed into fury. "They'll pay for this," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Every single one of them. Dr. Mendez, the specialists in New York and London, everyone who examined Junior and saw nothing wrong. They'll pay." "Right now," Jessica said gently, "Junior needs us. He's scared, Roberto. His whole world just changed in an instant." She was right. Junior was clinging to them both, his small body trembling. tears running down his cheeks. Every sound was new, overwhelming. The ticking of a clock, the hum of air conditioning, the distant sounds of the city outside. For someone who'd lived in silence for 3 years, it must have been terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. They spent the rest of the night holding Junior, helping him process his new reality. Jessica softly sang lullabies, letting him get used to her voice. Roberto spoke to him constantly, telling him how much he loved him, how proud he was, how everything would be okay. And slowly, gradually, Junior began to calm, his fear giving way to wonder. As dawn broke, painting the room in soft pink light, Junior fell asleep in Jessica's arms, exhausted but peaceful. Roberto watched them, this woman who had changed everything and his son who could finally hear, and felt something shift irrevocably in his heart. "Jessica," he said softly, not wanting to wake Junior. "What you did tonight. You gave my son his hearing. You gave me my child's voice. How do I ever thank you for that?" Jessica looked up at him, her eyes still wet with tears, her face exhausted but radiant. "You don't need to thank me. I did it because I love him, because he deserves every chance at life that was denied to my sister." "You love him?" Roberto repeated quietly. "Of course I do," Jessica said. "How could I not? He's the sweetest, bravest little soul I've ever known." Roberto reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb wiping away a stray tear. "And what about me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you love me too?" The question hung in the air between them, crossing every boundary they'd carefully maintained. Jessica's breath caught, her eyes searching his face. She started, but couldn't finish. "Because I love you," Roberto said, the words finally breaking free. "I think I've loved you since the day you walked into my house and challenged me to see my son differently. Since the moment you showed me what courage looks like, what hope feels like. I love you, Jessica Santos, and I don't care about the differences between us or what anyone else thinks. I just know that when I imagine my future now, you're in it. You and Junior, both of you." Jessica's tears came faster now. "I'm scared," she whispered. "We're so different, Roberto. Your world, my world. They don't match." "Then we'll build a new world," Roberto said fiercely. "One that's just ours, where the only thing that matters is this." He gestured between them, to Junior sleeping peacefully in her arms. "This feeling, this family we've somehow created. What if I'm not enough?" Jessica asked, her deepest fear finally spoken aloud. "What if you wake up one day and realize I don't fit into your life?" Roberto moved closer, taking her free hand in both of his. "You are everything, Jessica. You're the most real, most genuine, most beautiful person I've ever known. You see past the money and the success to who I really am. And you love my son not because you're paid to, but because that's who you are. Someone who loves with her whole heart, who fights for what's right even when it's hard, who believes in miracles when everyone else has given up." He paused, his eyes intense on hers. "I'm the one who might not be enough for you. I'm difficult, controlling, damaged in ways I'm still learning to heal. But if you'll give me a chance, give us a chance, I promise I'll spend every day trying to deserve you." Jessica looked at him. This powerful man who'd just admitted his vulnerability, who held his son's life in one hand and his heart in the other, offering both to her. She thought of Mrs. Silva's warning, of all the reasons this was complicated and risky. Then she thought of Junior's first word, Daddy, and how Roberto had collapsed with joy. She thought of quiet evenings in the garden, of learning to trust again, of building something beautiful from broken pieces. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I love you too. Yes, I want to try." Roberto's smile was like nothing she'd ever seen. pure, uninhibited joy. He leaned forward, mindful of Junior sleeping between them, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he breathed. "Thank you for seeing me, for saving us." They sat there as the sun rose, a new family forged in the midst of crisis and revelation, held together by love and hope, and the certain knowledge that together they could face anything. But the real challenges were just beginning. The next morning, Roberto canceled all his meetings and took Junior to the hospital. Not Dr. Mendez's clinic. Roberto would never trust that man again. But to the premier research hospital in São Paulo, demanding the best pediatric specialists available. The examination took hours. Doctors crowded around, fascinated and horrified by what Jessica had discovered. The parasite she'd removed was sent to the pathology lab for analysis. Scans revealed damage to Junior's ear that was already beginning to heal, now that the foreign body was gone. "Mr. Moreau," the chief pediatrician said, her expression grave, "we need to be honest with you. This parasite, we've never seen anything quite like it. It appears to have been living in your son's ear canal, likely since birth or early infancy. It was feeding on tissue and creating inflammation that blocked sound transmission. The fact that it was removed without causing severe damage is remarkable." "The woman who removed it is remarkable," Roberto said firmly. "And if your staff had done their jobs properly years ago, my son wouldn't have lost 3 years of his life to silence." The doctor had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right, Mr. Moreau. This should have been caught in routine examinations. We failed Junior and we failed you. All I can offer now is our complete commitment to his recovery and rehabilitation." Jessica, who'd insisted on coming despite Roberto's protests that she should rest, stepped forward. "What does his prognosis look like? Will he be able to develop normal speech?" The doctor smiled at her. "You must be the nanny who performed the extraction. That was incredibly brave and skilled work. As for Junior's prognosis, it's excellent. His hearing is likely to continue improving as the inflammation subsides. He'll need speech therapy, of course. He has 3 years of verbal development to catch up on. But children are remarkably adaptable. With proper support, there's no reason he can't develop completely normal speech and language skills." For the first time since discovering the parasite, Jessica allowed herself to truly believe it. Junior would be okay. Better than okay. He would thrive. Roberto watched her face transform with relief and felt his love for her deepen even further. This woman who'd carried the weight of his son's recovery on her shoulders, who'd trusted her instincts over medical authority, who'd risked everything to do what she knew was right. She was extraordinary. As they left the hospital with Junior chattering nonsense sounds in Roberto's arms, the child fascinated by his own voice, Roberto made a decision. "Jessica, there's something I need to do, and I need you with me." She looked at him questioningly. "What is it?" "I'm calling a press conference. I'm going to expose what happened to Junior. The negligence, the missed diagnoses, the parasite that could have been found years ago if doctors had actually looked. But more than that, I'm announcing the creation of a foundation dedicated to comprehensive health screenings for children. Free, thorough examinations that don't stop at the first diagnosis but actually investigate root causes." Jessica's eyes widened. "Roberto, that's ambitious." "I have the resources," he said. "What I didn't have was purpose. Now I do. But Jessica, I need you to be part of this, not as an employee, but as a partner. I want you to help lead this foundation. Your instincts, your compassion, your real-world understanding of what families need. That's invaluable." "Me? But I'm not qualified." "You're more qualified than any degree could make you," Roberto interrupted. "You saved my son when trained doctors failed. You saw what they couldn't because you cared enough to really look. That's the kind of vision this foundation needs." Jessica was overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Roberto urged. Help me turn this tragedy into something that prevents other children from suffering. Help me build something meaningful. Help me change the world, Jessica. How could she say no to that? To the chance to honor Carolina's memory by saving other children? To working alongside the man she loved to create something truly important? Yes, she said, her voice strong despite her tears. Yes, I'll help you. For Junior, for Carolina, for every child who needs someone to see them. Roberto pulled her close, Junior between them, the three of them a unit now. Thank you. For everything. The press conference 2 days later was explosive. Roberto stood at a podium in one of São Paulo's premier hotels, news cameras rolling, reporters from across the country in attendance. Jessica stood in the wings, holding Junior, who was wearing tiny headphones to protect his new hearing from the overwhelming noise. Roberto's statement was damning. He detailed every misdiagnosis, named every specialist who'd failed to find the parasite, revealed the staggering amounts he'd paid for worthless treatments. He showed medical records, photographic evidence of the parasite, Junior's dramatic improvement since its removal. For 3 years, Roberto said, his voice carrying across the silent room, I believed my son would never hear. I paid the world's best doctors, traveled to premier hospitals across continents, spent millions seeking a cure. And all that time, the solution was simple. It just required someone who cared enough to really look. Not a doctor, not a specialist, but a young woman with a high school education and a heart full of love. He paused, emotion thick in his voice. Jessica Santos removed the parasite from my son's ear 3 nights ago. She did what teams of Harvard-trained physicians couldn't because she paid attention. She noticed. She cared. And now my son can hear, can speak, can participate fully in life, all because one person refused to accept that nothing more could be done. The room erupted with questions, but Roberto raised his hand. I'm not finished. I'm announcing today the creation of the Muro Foundation for Pediatric Health. Our mission is simple. Ensure no child suffers unnecessarily because their condition wasn't properly investigated. We'll provide free, comprehensive health screenings, not cursory examinations that check boxes, but thorough investigations that seek root causes. We'll train doctors in observational medicine, in trusting their instincts, in seeing patients as individuals rather than diagnoses. He looked toward Jessica, meeting her eyes across the room. And leading this initiative will be Miss Jessica Santos, the woman who gave my son his hearing back. She'll be the foundation's director of patient advocacy because she understands something most medical professionals have forgotten, that healing requires seeing the whole person, not just their symptoms. The media frenzy that followed was intense. Jessica's face appeared in newspapers across Brazil, her story told and retold, the humble nanny who'd achieved what the world's best doctors couldn't. Some praised her courage, others questioned her qualifications. But the public response was overwhelmingly positive, donations to the new foundation pouring in from across the country. What nobody knew, what Roberto and Jessica kept carefully private, was that their relationship had evolved far beyond professional partnership. In the weeks following the press conference, as they worked together establishing the foundation, their love deepened. Roberto found excuses to touch her hand during meetings, to lean close as they reviewed documents, to brush a strand of hair from her face. Jessica would catch herself staring at him during strategy sessions, admiring the passion in his voice when he spoke about their mission, the gentleness in his hands when he played with Junior. They stole moments together. Late-night phone calls after Junior was asleep, early morning coffee before the staff woke, brief encounters in hallways that lasted longer than they should. But they were careful, discreet, aware that their relationship would invite scrutiny and criticism. Mrs. Silva knew, of course. She saw the way they looked at each other, the new lightness in Roberto's step, the permanent smile on Jessica's face. But she kept their secret, merely raising an eyebrow occasionally in knowing acknowledgement. It was Junior who finally forced their hand. 3 months after gaining his hearing, Junior's speech had progressed remarkably. With intensive therapy and his natural intelligence, he was catching up quickly, forming complete sentences and engaging in real conversations for the first time in his life. One evening, as Jessica was reading him a bedtime story, Junior looked up at her with his serious dark eyes and asked, "Jessica, why don't you sleep in Daddy's room? Mommy used to sleep there." Jessica's face flushed deep red. "Junior, honey, it's not that simple. But you love Daddy," Junior said with the blunt honesty of a child. "And Daddy loves you. I can tell. So why don't you kiss like in the movies?" Jessica couldn't help laughing, even as her heart raced. "How do you know your daddy loves me?" "Because he smiles all the time now," Junior said simply. "Before you came, Daddy never smiled. Now he does. And he looks at you the way he looks at me, like you're the most important thing in the world." From the doorway, Roberto's voice spoke softly. "He's right, you know." Jessica's head snapped up. Roberto stood there in casual clothes, jeans and a simple shirt, so different from his usual business attire, looking at her with open affection. "Junior," Roberto said, walking into the room, "you're a very smart boy. But you need to sleep now. Tomorrow's a big day. We're going to the beach, remember?" Junior's eyes lit up. "The beach! With all the water sounds!" He'd been fascinated by every new experience since gaining his hearing. After tucking Junior in and making sure he was asleep, Roberto took Jessica's hand and led her down to his private study, a room she'd never entered before. It was distinctly his. Leather furniture, dark wood, shelves lined with books on finance and philosophy. But what caught her attention was the wall of photographs. Images of Mariana, Junior as a baby, candid shots of Roberto's journey from poverty to wealth. "I want you to see this," Roberto said, gesturing to the photos. "Because if we're going to move forward, you need to understand my past." Jessica looked at the images of Mariana, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and an easy smile. She was lovely. "She was," Roberto agreed, "and I loved her. But Jessica, what I felt for Mariana was different from what I feel for you. Mariana and I, we were young, passionate, building a life together. It was good, it was real, but it was also..." He paused, searching for words. "It was easy. We came from similar backgrounds, wanted similar things. There was no challenge, no friction, just smooth compatibility." He turned to face Jessica fully. "You challenge me every day. You make me question assumptions I didn't know I had. You push me to be better, to see beyond wealth and success to what actually matters. Loving Mariana was comfortable. Loving you is transformative." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes. "I've been so scared that I could never measure up to her memory." "You don't need to measure up," Roberto said gently. "You're not replacing anyone. You're creating something new. And Jessica, I need you to know, I don't want you as my employee, or even just as Junior's caretaker. I want you as my partner in every sense. In the foundation, in raising Junior, in building a life together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jessica's breath caught. "I'm not proposing," Roberto said quickly, seeing her panic. "Not yet. It's too soon, and I know you need time to adjust to all these changes. But I want you to have this as a promise that I'm committed to this, to us, for as long as you'll have me." He opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace, a simple pendant in the shape of a bird in flight, crafted from platinum and set with tiny diamonds. "It reminded me of you," Roberto explained. "Free, beautiful, soaring above all the obstacles that try to hold you down. I want you to know that whatever happens, you're free to be yourself with me. No expectations, no demands that you become someone you're not." Jessica took the necklace with trembling hands. "It's beautiful. Roberto, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll give us a real chance," he urged. Not hidden, not secret. Let me tell the world that the woman I love is also the woman who saved my son, who's revolutionizing pediatric care, who makes me want to be a better man. Let me be proud of us. Jessica thought of all the reasons this was complicated. The media attention, the whispers about a gold digger and a billionaire, the class divide that would never fully disappear. But then she thought of Junior calling them both to watch a bird in the garden, of late-night strategy sessions where they finished each other's sentences, of the way Roberto looked at her like she was precious, important, worthy. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, let's do this properly. No more hiding. Roberto's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time, they kissed. Really kissed, with nothing held back. No barriers between them. It was tender and passionate, and right in ways Jessica hadn't known a kiss could be. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Roberto rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Jessica Santos. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubborn refusal to accept defeat. I love how you love my son. I love who I am when I'm with you. I love you too, Jessica whispered. I love your complexity, your vulnerability beneath all that strength. I love that you're not perfect, that you make mistakes and admit them. I love building something meaningful with you. I love our life together, the one we're creating. They stood there in the study, holding each other, the walls covered with images of Roberto's past while they planned their future. Outside, São Paulo's lights glittered across the horizon, millions of stories playing out across the vast city. But in this moment there was only theirs. Going public with their relationship was both easier and harder than expected. The foundation staff had suspected for weeks. It was hard to hide the way Roberto and Jessica interacted, the gentle chemistry between them. Most were supportive, happy to see their demanding boss finally finding happiness. The media was less kind. Headlines screamed about the Cinderella nanny and the billionaire. Bloggers speculated whether Jessica had seduced Roberto to secure her position. Society columnists questioned whether a man of Roberto's status should be with someone from such a humble background. Jessica tried not to let it bother her, but it was difficult. One particularly vicious article described her as barely educated and suggested she was taking advantage of Roberto's grief over his late wife. When Roberto found her crying in her office after reading it, his rage was terrible to behold. "I'm handling it," he said grimly, already on his phone. "My lawyers are preparing defamation suits, and I'm giving an exclusive interview setting the record straight." "Roberto, don't," Jessica protested. "It'll only make it worse. Let people think what they want." "I will not let them disrespect you," Roberto said fiercely. "You deserve better than this gossip and innuendo. Jessica, you're the director of patient advocacy for a foundation that's changing children's lives across Brazil. You're the woman who saved my son. You're brilliant, compassionate, and accomplished in your own right. I won't let anyone reduce you to some kind of gold digger narrative." The interview Roberto gave was powerful. He spoke candidly about his relationship with Jessica, about how she'd challenged him to grow, about the foundation they were building together. He addressed the class divide directly. "Yes, Jessica and I come from different economic backgrounds," he said to the interviewer. "I came from the favelas, built my wealth through hard work and opportunity. Jessica came from a similar background but didn't have the same opportunities I had. She had to sacrifice her education to care for sick family members. Does that make her less valuable, less intelligent, less worthy of respect? If anything, it makes her more remarkable. She achieved incredible things with far fewer resources than I had. That's not something to criticize. It's something to admire." The interview went viral, shared millions of times across social media. Public opinion began to shift, especially as more details emerged about the foundation's work. In its first 6 months, they'd screened over 10,000 children, finding and treating conditions that had been missed by previous doctors. Lives were being saved, Children were thriving, and Jessica was at the heart of it all. Her personal story, losing her sister Carolina, working tirelessly to support her younger brother Felipe, saving Junior against all odds, resonated with people. She became a symbol of hope, proving that compassion and determination could achieve what wealth and credentials sometimes couldn't. But the greatest validation came from an unexpected source. 9 months after the foundation's launch, Jessica received a letter from the Brazilian Medical Association. They wanted to honor her with a special recognition award for her contribution to pediatric medicine. The award ceremony would be held in Brasilia, attended by medical professionals from across the country. "I can't accept this," Jessica said, holding the letter with shaking hands. "I'm not a doctor. These people, they're going to resent me being honored alongside them." "Let them resent you," Roberto said. "You deserve this recognition. What you've done, not just for Junior, but for all the children the foundation has helped. That's worthy of every honor they want to give you." The award ceremony was intimidating. Jessica stood in an elegant ballroom surrounded by doctors with multiple degrees, researchers who'd published groundbreaking papers, surgeons who'd pioneered new techniques. She felt like an imposter in her simple black dress. Though Roberto had offered to buy her anything she wanted, she'd insisted on wearing something she'd purchased herself. When her name was called, she walked to the stage on trembling legs. The president of the Medical Association, a distinguished doctor in his 70s, handed her the plaque and said something that made the entire experience worthwhile. "Miss Santos, you've reminded us of something we'd forgotten in our pursuit of credentials and specialization, that medicine is, at its heart, about seeing patients, really seeing them. Your work has challenged our profession to be better, to look deeper, to trust our observational skills as much as our test results. This association is honored to recognize your contribution to healing." The applause that followed was genuine, respectful. As Jessica looked out at the audience, she saw Roberto standing in the front row, tears streaming down his face, clapping harder than anyone else. And beside him, Felipe, her younger brother, now 17 and thriving in school thanks to the resources Roberto had provided, was beaming with pride. In that moment, Jessica understood that she'd finally fulfilled the promise she'd made to Carolina. She'd taken her pain, her loss, her determination, and transformed it into something meaningful. She'd saved Junior, yes, but in doing so, she'd also started a movement that would save countless other children. Life settled into a new rhythm. Roberto and Jessica officially moved in together, combining their households in a way that felt natural. Junior, now 4 years old and increasingly verbal, adapted easily, thrilled to have his Jessica living with him and his daddy officially. The foundation continued to grow, opening branches in 3 other Brazilian states. Jessica traveled frequently, giving talks about observational medicine and patient advocacy. Roberto supported her fully, often adjusting his business schedule to accompany her, the two of them becoming a formidable team. Felipe moved into one of the estate's guest houses to be closer to his sister while he completed his final year of high school. He and Junior became close, the teenager patient with the little boy who followed him everywhere, asking endless questions about everything. Mrs. Silva watched the expanding family with satisfaction. "I told you to be careful," she said to Jessica one morning as they prepared breakfast together. "I was afraid he'd break your heart. But I was wrong. He's given you everything you deserve." Jessica smiled, looking out the window where Roberto was teaching Junior to ride a bicycle, both of them laughing when the boy wobbled and nearly fell. "He gave me a family, Mrs. Silva. After losing everyone I loved, I never thought I'd have that again. But here we are. Messy and complicated, and absolutely perfect." A year after that first kiss in Roberto's study, he proposed properly. It wasn't at a fancy restaurant or during an exotic vacation. It was in Junior's bedroom, after they'd finished reading the little boy a bedtime story. Junior had fallen asleep between them, his small hand clutching Jessica's. Roberto looked at the scene, this woman he loved and the son she'd saved, and pulled out the ring he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Jessica," he whispered, not wanting to wake Junior. "I can't imagine my life without you in it. You've transformed everything. My son, my purpose, my heart. Marry me. Be my wife, Junior's mother, my partner in all things. Build this life with me officially, completely, forever." Jessica looked at the ring, a beautiful diamond that caught the soft lamplight, then at Roberto's face, seeing all his love and hope reflected there. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They married 3 months later in a simple ceremony in the mansion's garden, the same garden where they'd first really talked, where they'd sat under the stars and begun falling in love. Junior was the ring bearer, taking his role very seriously. Felipe walked Jessica down the aisle. "Mrs. Silva," cried through the entire ceremony. But the most touching moment came during the vows. Roberto had written his own. "Jessica, you came into my life when I'd forgotten how to hope. You saw past my walls to the broken man underneath, and you didn't run. You stayed. You healed my son, and in doing so, healed me. You taught me that love isn't about perfection or status or having everything figured out. It's about showing up, paying attention, and choosing each other even when it's hard. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to see you, really see you, the way you've always seen me. I promise to build a world with you where love matters more than money, where kindness is more valuable than success, where our family, created not by blood but by choice, is the greatest treasure. I love you, Jessica Santos. I am honored to be your husband." By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Jessica's vows were equally moving. "Roberto, when I walked into your house 1.5 years ago, I was broken. I'd lost everyone I loved, and I didn't believe I deserved happiness. But you and Junior showed me that love doesn't run out. It multiplies. That opening your heart doesn't make it more vulnerable. It makes it stronger. You've supported my dreams, celebrated my achievements, and never once made me feel less than because of where I came from. You've given me a family, a purpose, a home. But more than that, you've given me yourself, all your complexity, your vulnerability, your strength. I promise to love Junior as if he were mine, to build this foundation with everything I have, to challenge you when you need it, and support you always. I promise to never take for granted the gift of this life we're creating together. I love you, Roberto Moreau. I am proud to be your wife." As they kissed, sealing their vows, Junior cheered loudly, his hearing still a source of joy for everyone who loved him. The guests laughed and applauded, and Jessica thought about how far they'd all come from that first frightening night when she'd pulled the parasite from Junior's ear. That single act of courage had led to all this: a foundation saving lives, a little boy thriving, a family formed from loss and love, a future full of possibilities. 5 years later, Jessica stood in the Foundation's new headquarters in Rio de Janeiro, preparing for the gala celebrating their milestone. 100,000 children screened, with thousands of previously undiagnosed conditions discovered and treated. She was now 30 years old, confident in ways she'd never imagined possible. She held a master's degree in public health, earned while working at the Foundation, with Roberto's encouragement and support. She'd published papers on observational medicine and patient advocacy. She'd given a TED Talk that had been viewed millions of times. She'd become a voice for children who couldn't speak for themselves. But more than any professional achievement, she was happy. Truly, deeply happy, in a way she'd once thought impossible. Roberto found her standing alone in the empty ballroom before the gala began, staring out at the city lights. At 47, he was distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair. but he moved with the energy of a much younger man. Success had softened him, made him more open, more present. "Thinking about Carolina?" he asked gently, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Jessica leaned back against him. Always. Wondering what she'd think of all this. Whether she'd be proud. "She would be," Roberto said with certainty. "You've honored her memory in the most beautiful way, by making sure other children don't suffer as she did. That's a legacy of love, Jessica." She turned in his arms to face him. "We did it together. I couldn't have built any of this without you." "We're a team," Roberto agreed, kissing her forehead. "In everything." The ballroom doors opened, and Junior walked in, now 9 years old, tall for his age, with his father's dark eyes and his mother Mariana's gentle smile. He was completely fluent in Portuguese and English, his early hearing loss barely noticeable, except for a slight accent that speech therapists said would fade as he matured. "Mom, Dad," he said. He'd started calling Jessica Mom 2 years ago, and it still made her tear up every time. "The guests are starting to arrive, and guess what? Felipe just got here with his girlfriend." Jessica's face lit up. Her brother, now 22, was finishing medical school, inspired by his sister's work to pursue medicine himself. "His girlfriend? This is new." "Her name is Anna, and she's really nice," Junior reported. "She's studying to be a pediatrician. Felipe says he's going to ask her to marry him soon, but I'm not supposed to tell you that." He clapped his hand over his mouth, eyes wide with the realization that he'd just revealed the secret. Roberto laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "We'll pretend we didn't hear that. Come on, let's go greet our guests." The gala was spectacular. Hundreds of people gathered to celebrate the foundation's work. Doctors, donors, politicians, and most importantly, families whose children had been helped. Testimony after testimony highlighted lives changed, futures restored, hope given where there had been none. During her speech, Jessica shared the story that had started everything: Junior's diagnosis, the missed opportunities, that terrifying night when she'd found the parasite. She spoke about Carolina, about loss transforming into purpose. She thanked Roberto, calling him her partner in every sense. She thanked the foundation staff, the doctors who'd embraced their mission, the families who trusted them with their children's care. But she ended with a message that captured everything she'd learned. "When I removed that parasite from Junior's ear 5 years ago, I didn't know I was starting a revolution. I just knew that a child was suffering, and I had to try to help." That's what I want to leave you with tonight, the power of trying, of not accepting that nothing more can be done, of trusting your instincts, of paying attention, of caring enough to really see the people right in front of you. Medicine is important. Science is crucial. But so is compassion. So is humanity. So is love. Don't ever forget that the most powerful healing often comes from the simplest act: really seeing someone and refusing to look away. The applause was thunderous. As Jessica left the stage, Roberto met her, pulling her into his arms, and whispered, "I'm so proud of you. Not just for what you've built, but for who you are." Later that night, after the last guest had left and they were driving home through Rio's glittering streets, Junior fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the evening's excitement. Jessica watched him in the rearview mirror, this beautiful boy who'd brought her and Roberto together, whose suffering had sparked a movement that changed thousands of lives. "What are you thinking?" Roberto asked, taking her hand. "That I'm grateful," Jessica said, "for all of it, even the hard parts. If Carolina hadn't died, if I hadn't known that grief, I wouldn't have recognized Junior's pain. If I hadn't been desperate for work, I wouldn't have taken the nanny job. If you hadn't been willing to take a chance on me despite my lack of credentials, none of this would exist. Every piece of our story, even the painful ones, Let us hear. Roberto brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. I used to think success was about money and power, about building an empire that would last. But you taught me that real success is this. He gestured between them, toward their sleeping son in the back seat. Building a life that matters, creating love from loss, turning pain into purpose. As they pulled up to their home, no longer just Roberto's mansion, but their family home, filled with laughter and music, and Junior's artwork covering the expensive walls, Jessica felt a profound sense of peace. She'd started this journey broken, grieving, uncertain. She'd found not just a job, but a calling, not just an employer, but a partner, not just survival, but purpose. And Junior, sweet Junior, who'd lived the first 3 years of his life in silence, now filled their home with constant chatter, questions, songs, and laughter. He was thriving in school, showing an interest in music and art. He was kind, thoughtful, aware of how blessed he was to have been given a second chance at hearing. That night, after tucking Junior into bed and listening to his prayers, which always included thanks for his mom and dad, and Uncle Felipe, and Great-Aunt Mrs. Silva and all the children the foundation was helping, Jessica and Roberto sat in their favorite spot in the garden. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked?" Jessica asked. "If I'd just accepted the doctor's diagnosis and not searched for that parasite?" "Every day," Roberto admitted. "And every day I'm grateful that you're the kind of person who doesn't accept easy answers, who trusts her instincts, who has the courage to act even when she's terrified." Jessica leaned her head on his shoulder. "We make a good team." "The best team," Roberto agreed. "In business, in parenting, in changing the world, in love. We're unstoppable together." And they were. In the years that followed, the foundation expanded internationally. Jessica became a sought-after speaker and consultant. Roberto gradually stepped back from his investment firm to focus on philanthropic work. Junior grew into a remarkable young man, eventually choosing to follow in his mother's footsteps, studying to become a pediatric advocate himself. Felipe married Ana, and they had 2 children who called Jessica and Roberto Tia and Tio, expanding the family even more. Mrs. Silva retired at 70 but refused to leave the estate, claiming she needed to keep an eye on everyone. The mansion that had once been silent and cold became a hub of activity, love, and joy. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came on the 10th anniversary of Junior's healing. The foundation organized a reunion of all the children they'd helped over the years, now thousands of young people, each with their own story of diagnosis and treatment and hope restored. Junior, now 14 and remarkably poised, gave a speech to the assembled crowd. "I don't remember the silence. I was too young. But I've seen videos of myself before, and I know what I was missing. The chance to hear my dad's voice telling me he loved me. The sound of rain on windows, music, laughter, my mom singing me to sleep. I got all of that because one person cared enough to look, to question, to trust her instincts over everyone else.